Welcome to the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices and Youth online seminar series. The center conducts research and provides trainings and technical assistance which investigate problems, craft solutions, and design actionable strategies for translating research into usable, feasible, and effective strategies for transitioning stakeholders, which include VR agencies, policymakers, researchers, transitioning youth and their family, educators, practitioners, and employers. Our online seminars are designed to provide VR counselors and other youth employment stakeholders with short training lessons on a wide variety of topics related to VR practices and youth outcomes. Each seminar is conducted by well-respected content experts. Once you've watched the online seminar, you have the opportunity to take a quiz to show what you've learned. A link to the quiz will appear once the seminar video is completed. If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you'll be emailed a certificate of completion for your records. If your score is below 70%, you'll have one additional chance to re-watch the seminar and take the quiz. Check out our website at www.vrpracticesandyouth.org and check it out frequently for new seminars, publications, free webinars on topics related to providing effective vocational rehabilitation services to youth and young adults, or to contact us directly with questions. The Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices and Youth is funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration on Community Living. Now, on to the seminar.
Welcome to the VR and Youth Rehabilitation Research and Training Center's webinar, Introduction to Seamless Transition with Ann Deschamps and Laura Owens. I'm Laura Owens with Transcend, and my colleague Ann
from Transcend. Hi, Laura. Our learning objectives today, we are going to be understanding the process of seamless transition. So we're going to talk about seamless transition. We're going to explain what seamless transition looks like and provide some examples and identify best practices for seamless transition planning. We often talk about seamless transition, and it's become a lexicon in transition vocabulary. And so this is an opportunity to really define it and talk about what it's like.
So slide 3, I guess, answers the question, what is seamless transition? So bottom line, seamless transition is no service disruption. So the first day after school exit should look the same as the last day of school. So students would have the same jobs, the same community activities, the same types of supports and staff supports. So nothing should change other than they're no longer in school and they're working in the community.
And of course, this requires a lot of work before the student exits schools, a lot of collaboration to set it up so that a seamless transition can exist.
Slide 4, underlying vision. So clearly, as you said, Anne, there has to be collaboration and connection with other systems that students are transitioning to. So we need to develop a transition system that promotes student self-determination and informed decision-making, promote meaningful supervised work experiences and community-integrated competitive work experiences, promote the linkage to adult community and post-school resources, supports, and services, and promote family participation in the transition process.
Right, and I think it's important to point out here, Laura, that in transition planning for every youth, regardless of disability, there is a continuum, and you have to meet them where they are on that continuum and move them along. And they're going to be in different places depending on what their experience has been in high school.
And that's such a good point, because the continuum is so important, and many times individuals with significant disabilities tend to get lost and they get stuck on the continuum. So it's so important that we make sure that they hit each area on the continuum to move forward.
Slide 5, the provision of transition services in a seamless model.
So just envision a community rehabilitation provider coming into your school and workplaces to provide individualized services before the student leaves school, so that there is that seamless transition, that CRP staff now knows the school in a safe environment through school. The development of MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, or Memorandum of Agreements between schools and community rehab providers that will be providing those services. And then CRPs may be serving students that they may not typically have served in the past by their organization. We've done this in Wisconsin with several school districts where we have had an MOU and we work with targeted populations that the school has said, we really are struggling with kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities. They can get a job, but they can't keep a job. Can you help us? Because there's really no adult service for them once they leave school unless they have mental health issues.
Right, and the schools are identifying gaps, and the CRPs need to fill those gaps, even if it is a population that they're not traditionally used to working with.
Exactly.
And because, you know, work is work, and transition is effective transition, regardless of the population that you're working with. And certainly each requires different skills, but
and then, of course, collaboration, because that's really the thread that kind of binds seamless transition, is collaborating and making sure that you're streamlining services, because so many times we have duplication of services, or like you said, Anne, avoiding those gaps. There's gaps between what schools are providing that CRPs can come in and support, and then there are gaps that CRPs may not be able to focus on, like maybe teaching self-determination. And that can be done in school in conjunction with work experiences through the CRP.
Right, and I have never seen an effective transition program that is not collaborative in nature. I mean, the collaboration is transition's middle name.
Yes, I like that. Collaboration.
Well, I mean, you can't do it because if you have family, you have the student first and foremost, then you have family, then you have school system, you have VR system, you have CRPs, you also might have other services involved, right, a DD agency or even health-related agencies, mental health agencies, other social service agencies involved too. If there isn't collaboration, there will be duplication of services, and usually there's duplication of services, but then there's gaps as well, like you said, and people don't know what the other person's doing. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, which is why the whole transition field came to be in the first place. It is, collaboration is absolutely critical, and you know, that's why in the pre-service programs, people who are being trained in transition have so much focus on collaboration, because it is critical for the success of any transition program.
And I think collaboration also helps with the wraparound of services and kind of breaking down those silo walls. Because if we can start blending and braiding funding and services, then it's going to really impact positively on the outcomes of students.
Well, and you know, the money is shrinking, not growing, right. And so to effectively use the funds that we have to work together and kind of get past our territorial traditional roles that we've had in the past. I know, absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to talk now a little bit on slide 6. About seamless transition model. This seamless transition model is based on the 2005 guideposts for success that was developed by the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth in 2005. They took all the research from the late 80s till 2005 and put it all together and developed these what are called the guideposts.
Guideposts for Success in Transition Planning that really is a wonderful compilation of the research and boiled it all down. Then in 2007, Rich Luking at Transcend took the guideposts and developed this model of transition planning that we then took and implemented in 11 counties in the state of Maryland to see if it would work. The project was funded by the Rehabilitation Services Administration and given to VR, the VR agency, which in Maryland is called DOORS. And DOORS then gave grants to 11 different school systems to implement this flow of services with technical assistance provided by Transcend. So we went into 11 different school systems with 11 different populations. It wasn't just one specific population of youth with disabilities. We had some school systems that chose youth with significant disabilities, some school systems that chose youth, diploma-bound youth who had IEPs, and some had a variety of different. So from 2008 to 2013, we implemented this model, and I'm going to take you through the model kind of step by step. So the model starts 3 years prior to exit or 10th grade for those diploma-bound youth, where the student kind of enrolls in the seamless transition model. And the focus at this point is what we call the discovery process, and where the student is, surprise, surprise, discovering themselves. They're figuring themselves out. So this is the part where self-advocacy instruction takes place, where we had a wonderful tool called the Positive Personal Profile, and this helped focus the student on understanding their strengths and weaknesses, their dreams, their goals, kind of narrowing down what they're interested in, what their abilities are, and really painted a wonderful picture of where that student is 3 years before they're leaving high school. In addition, and this was a real interesting process. The student is learning about their IEP. I was still surprised in 2009 to see how many youth weren't even aware that they had IEPs. So understanding IEPs, breaking through that educational jargon so the student actually understands what the goals are on the IEP, so the parents understand what the goals are on the IEP, and that it is not an educational checkbox that gets completed, but it is a meaningful goal development process that includes transition planning. So we have the student IEP development, the family support and participation. Families are absolutely critical, and it is still, again, really tough because a lot of families don't have the time and inclination to attend IEP meetings, and a lot do and are very actively involved. But again, it's critical. Families play a critical role, and acknowledging that the families are going through the transition process as well as the youth and need the support is absolutely critical.
So Anne, is this particular part done in schools then? In schools, absolutely, in schools. And again, working with teachers to help them integrate self-advocacy instruction, because self-advocacy instruction doesn't necessarily have to be a separate, standalone class. No. I mean, it's wonderful if you have that luxury and can do that, because there's so many great things you can do with that, but you can teach self-advocacy skills through any academic class. Yes. And luckily, there are lots of resources out there now to help you do that.
Well, I used to look at self-advocacy and the IEP. So my students would go in and say, here's my accommodations, and they'd go to their general ed teachers and say, here are my accommodations for this class, in a way to help them as they moved into the real world where nobody was going to ask them.
Absolutely. Well, and you're right, Laura, because the IEP provides the perfect vehicle to teach self-advocacy skills. And, I hear from teachers a lot, And when I was working in a school system, I heard this a lot, that we don't have time to teach self-advocacy skills. So we would work to take what the existing structures, what they have to do anyway, and make that an opportunity to teach self-advocacy skills, including understanding what are your accommodations on your IEP and how do you ask for them from the teachers.
Exactly.
Don't have other people doing it for you.
Right, right. Because we won't have time to not teach self-advocacy, really.
Exactly. And it's not a separate thing to teach.
Right.
It's just a question of understanding it and how to integrate it into what you're already teaching. 11th grade, 2 years prior to exit. In Maryland, as I said, VR is called DOORS. So DOORS opened case, and the applications, we started exploring what the options were for post-school for the youth who were now in 11th grade or 2 years prior to exit. They were participating in work-based experiences. Absolutely critical. Exposure is everything. And the exposure takes place during their secondary years, and hopefully earlier than that, ideally. But they're participating in work-based experiences. Hopefully they're getting out into the community and getting a number of different experiences and trying out different things to see what works best for them, what they like the best, and where they're the most effective. Again, the student-led IEP development continues, the family support participation continues, because again, the families can provide critical support, and in some cases are the connections to the jobs for the youth as well. Really exciting in the Maryland Seamless Transition Collaborative Project, what we call MYSTIC, having DOORS opening the case 2 years out, because that really wasn't the way that it had worked before. What we found, which was somewhat surprising, I think, was that having DOORS get involved 2 years out didn't require a significant amount of work on their part. It was understanding who's coming up through the system, who they can expect to be connected with when the students leave school, inviting a DOORS representative to come to transition council meetings as they had. Part of the seamless transition model is, as we said earlier in the webinar, collaboration is so critical. And part of the seamless transition model, in every single county that had what's called a project management team that would meet monthly. And at the table, the project management team was somebody representing everybody who's involved in this process. So the school system was represented, the family was represented, in some cases the youth was represented, the DOORS was representative, any of the ancillary services that the student was involved in would be represented there as well. So the process, the seamless transition process, could be coordinated. Now, at these project management team meetings, we weren't specifically talking about youth. We were talking about the process and how we could work effectively together as a process, and that's very different. Because obviously, if we were talking about the youth would be in the meeting. But this was more about how the systems are working together and how do we braid services and how can that be most effective. And that was critical to the success, and it wasn't. And what we found is the PMTs, project management teams that survived, were the ones where the individuals around the table knew what their role was. If they knew what their role was, they would keep coming around the table. But if you're going to meet just for the sake of meeting to talk, forget it. You're going to lose people. They don't have time.
Well, and I think that's really true. We've got so much on our plates nowadays that I think having those clearly defined roles and responsibilities are critical for any team.
Right. So we come to the last year in school, 12th grade or 1 year prior to exit. You've had those work-based experiences before. Now we're ready for that paid employment experience, because research shows that at least one paid employment experience before you leave secondary school is going to make the difference with success after you graduate from high school. So here now we're in definitely paid employment mode. We're looking at linkages to health and social organizations that you might need to get all the systems in place so that after you leave school, you're going to be successful, including public benefits management if you're turning 18, and whatever you need to do academically to be able to graduate and to exit, all of those are in place. And at this point, DOORS knows. VR knows the individual, so it's not a new, introducing the person to DOORS 3 months before they leave school, which was frequently the way it was. Now, the final part of the model is post-school completion, so 2 years, but beyond high school, you're looking at follow-up, paid employment, receiving support services from a CRP, or enrolled in a post-secondary education, receiving supports from disability campus services as needed or requested. So how is the student doing? Are they still connected into the system, and are they receiving supports from CRP if they're eligible for that? They may not be eligible. So has DOORS closed their case? Have they been a success after 90 days? Because what happens, sometimes the student gets successful, they may not be eligible to receive services from a CRP. They have a job, they keep the job, then DOORS closes their case, they lose their job, and so, it begins again, and hopefully they'll go back to DOORS. So I'm going to go back a little bit, actually, if I can take a minute here to look at the whole model. So this is the
Slide 6?
Yes, slide 6. Thank you. I haven't been very good about announcing those numbers. This is the whole model, seamless transition. And, all these elements were implemented in some way, shape, or form in all 11 counties in Maryland. The interesting thing is that it looked different in every single county. These were there, but it wasn't the same. What they had in common was certainly the discovery, the connection to VR, the connection to the CRPs, and the family involvement. And linkages to needed services, and the monthly meetings of the project management team with the different organizations that were involved. So everybody was communicating and collaborating, which was absolutely critical, because when services don't continue is when the communication stops. And in a couple of the counties, they transitioned their project management team into transition councils that are still in existence today in 2017. And again, that was because of the collaboration and communication. It is such a critical component for transition.
And I think this model also shows that transition is local. I think Absolutely. So many times we make the mistake that transition is from the state, and the state dictates, says what needs to happen. And this showed that, in all of these different counties, they still had all of the critical components, but it was different based on their needs and what they had to do. So transition really is local.
Right. Transition is local. And part of the success of this, and the reason it was successful, is because it wasn't a program. Right. And that we had to correct that a lot, because people kept saying, oh, this is the Mystic program. It's like, no, this is not the Mystic program. This is a seamless transition model that we're implementing here. And, it is a model that has all the components that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar that's just applied to the system that exists. And the 11 school systems in Maryland are just like school systems throughout the entire country.
And I think that's such a good point, because I think so many times we call transition programs. And when we say transition programs, I think we lose the individual, because somebody has to not fit into that program at some point.
Right.
So if we look at transition services, which is what Mystic is, it was a transition service that we were providing to youth.
Right, exactly. Okay, I'm going to go back to...
So the biggest challenge, really, I think, from what we're talking about today with seamless transition is changing the entrenched culture and beliefs regarding employment of individuals with disabilities, to really look at it. Sorry, slide 11. So I think that's really the bit, and I was reminding her. So I think that's really what we're talking about with seamless transition. So let's look at slide 12 and look at some of the transition practices. One is exactly what we just talked about, Ann. Transition services are not programs, they're services.
Right, and they're not programs that kids get into and get out of.
Exactly.
They are services that can be implemented into any system.
Into any system, exactly.
It's a question of intention. It really is a question of intention and decision to focus.
Yes. The presumption that all students can work. Again, looking at no more asking, do you want to work, but where do you want to work, and how can we help you?
And also introducing the student to the world of work, especially if they haven't been introduced to it in secondary school.
Absolutely.
It's really exposure, exposure, exposure.
And that can be done through job shadowing, internships, volunteering, community involvement. It can be done in school, out of school, on weekends, summer employment. And then we can also integrate students into school-to-work opportunities that are already in existence, because some schools are fortunate enough to still have those opportunities for youth.
Right.
So slide 13, let's just kind of go over those 10 characteristics or best practices for seamless transition.
Okay, we start with early planning. This seamless transition model started in 10th grade or 3 years out, but we would encourage, before, the transition plan is 8th grade or 14, and in most places. So the earlier the better, and the earlier the student starts learning about their IEP in elementary school.
Early and often.
Right, early and often.
Yeah. Again, you talked about the interagency collaboration, so critically important in a seamless transition model, making sure that we're kind of breaking down those silos and figuring out where those gaps are and where there's systems where we are kind of duplicating those services, and how do we break that down?
And individual transition planning is always individualized. We talk about models and services, et cetera, and the core components are exactly what we've been talking about. But as applied to individuals, it takes on a different shape, and it looks different for each individual.
Absolutely. And again, the focus on integration, and I think also the focus on inclusion, because sometimes students can be integrated, but they're really not included. So how do we focus on including all youth?
And community relevant curriculum. And community-based instruction.
Together, yeah.
I mean, this is really about helping the youth transition to life after secondary school. What is life after secondary school? It's community. It's community, whether you're working, whether you're going to college, post-secondary, but you're in the community. Even if you're unemployed, you're in the community. And so it's community relevant curriculum and community-based instruction. And luckily, Laura, there are so many resources out there now, and so many companies that have developed good, helpful, community-relevant curriculum and community-based instruction. But this involves getting out into the community, getting out of the classroom and into the community. And the closer you get to leaving school, the more important that is for everybody. And this isn't just for people with significant disabilities. This is for everybody, because you're not going to learn. And how many stories have we heard of youth that had significant behavior issues in school, but the minute they got out in the community and working and saw the relevance of their education, it was a totally different ballgame.
Absolutely. And I think not only just bringing the students out in the community, out of those four walls of the school, but also the teachers, and building those business linkages. The only way you can build business linkages is if you are out talking to businesses and meeting with businesses,
right? Which
then leads to ultimately paid employment for youth, because that is the number one outcome that we want for students. And if we can have that while they're in school, they're more likely to have paid employment once they graduate.
Well, and the other thing, I'm starting to see this more now, which is great, and that is teachers getting out into the community and getting out of their role, their traditional role, and and teachers want to do it. My experience is the teachers want to get out there and they want to work with businesses, but they have so many so many parameters on them, put on them by the bureaucracy that is their system. And the way, oh, that's never been done before, we can't do that. We can't have a teacher working on Saturday because that's when the employer is there and with a youth. So we can't have that and then have them take time during the week. That won't work. So now I'm starting to see school systems are thinking outside the box and letting teachers get a little bit more creative in how they're going to get to paid employment.
And I think too, teachers are starting to think more creatively that really when they're out in the community on Saturday, when they go to or when they go get their
workout class or
their workout class, those are all ways that they can connect to those local businesses as well. And then, ongoing staff development and then monitoring, always monitoring and evaluating. I think sometimes we sit back on our laurels and we are, wow, we're perfect, we're great. Our question should always be, what are we doing and how do we do it better?
Right. What are we doing and how are we doing it better? And getting that feedback from the youth.
Yes.
Getting the feedback from the youth and keeping family involvement throughout all of this. Again, being mindful that the parent is going through that process as well. And so our final thought, keep calm and start collaborating. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar on seamless transition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices and Youth online seminar. Please follow the provided link to take the quiz. As a reminder, if you score 70% or more above, you will be emailed a certificate of completion. If you score below 70%, you'll have one more additional opportunity to re-watch the seminar and complete the quiz. Thank you.